Okay, let's get started then. Thank you. This is the last session, and thank you for being here. So I'm sure, I think there's a session which concluded at 3:15. I think people might be coming in, but I believe we can get started. So yeah, so today's topic is how do I ensure my Azure modern data warehouse or data platform is secure. So my name is Sriharsh Adari. So PaaS offers us multiple opportunities. I think you would have already seen this throughout these 3 days. Good quality content in multiple channels, virtual as well as in person using your SQL Saturdays and stuff. I highly encourage that you participate or in these sessions, right? And again, thank you for being here. I know this is the last session. Those are my details, that's my Twitter account and my email ID and my blog. I frequently blog on latest Azure Data Platform updates, like those on a weekly frequency, right? So I'm Sriharsh Adari. I work at JP Morgan Chase, and I have had 16 years of experience helping customers setting Microsoft-based data platform since 2005. Earlier it was on, on on-prem world using SSIS, ASRS, and SQL Server. Off late over the past 4 or 5 years, I've been working with customers on the Azure landscape, right? And also I frequently speak at local meetups and stuff, right? So yeah, so this is today's agenda. I just broken down into 3 aspects essentially. We'll look at what exactly an Azure modern data platform is or an Azure modern data warehouse is, and then we look at a typical case study. Like I'll take a typical on-premise data warehouse platform, how it looks like, and then we'll look at how you can actually transform. And third part is the security part of it, like how do you secure each and every individual components around it. So before I even proceed further, I would like to how many of you are from a data warehouse or a BI background? Oh, fantastic. I know, I think that's why you're here for this session. How about Azure? Like have you been using Azure or not much? Okay, that's nice. That's fine. That's nice, because that's the reason I have this point number 1 and 2, wherein I'll actually take an on-premise and I'll show how a transformed Azure-based architecture looks like, and then we'll look at the security. Since the audience is very less, I mean, you can just, I think more would join, but you can just ask me any question whenever you have. We can keep it very interactive, right? Yeah. So this is an case study scenario. So let's take a very small on-premise enterprise data warehouse. They have different subject areas like your sales, finance, and they have certain set of KPIs, but they wanted to actually, integrate more subject areas or create new business intelligence KPIs across the different subject areas. And they are looking at a cloud-based data lake because they are having some capacity limitations with their current on-premise architecture. And also they want to democratize machine learning and AI within their organization. From a challenge perspective, their build or DevOps process is very weak, and then they are having some storage and infrastructure challenges as well with respect to scaling their databases. So that's the reason they're looking at an cloud-based architecture. So this is, I think, since all of you are from a BI background, so this is basically all these source systems which they have, multiple ERP, CRM systems, and then there are flat files being loaded onto a Unix server, and then using a cron job, it's being driven across your ETL pipeline, first to a pre-staging database, staging, and then there are warehouse. In the warehouse, they have facts and dimensions. And then business users are using Alteryx for business BI. So this is a typical scenario, like this is the existing on-premise architecture we'll take. Now let's look at how you would look for an Azure-based architecture using that on-premise architecture, right? So what essentially we would do is, so these are the different Azure components. I'll just give a brief overview of each one of them. So instead of using cron jobs or using any other. So in the previous case, they were using typical Oracle stored procedures to drive their ETL. Here, there's something called as Azure Data Factory, which we will use. So that's the difference between traditional SSIS or your Informatica versus Azure Data Factory is Azure Data Factory is more of an ELT tool, extract, load, transform tool, wherein you extract the data from the sources, you load it into the destination, and then you do the processing over there. So it's essentially you're extracting, loading, and then doing the transform. So that's the Azure Data Factory. It's more of an orchestration engine per se. And then you have Azure Data Lake Store. So this is a very important part, right? So these days we hear about Internet of Things or telemetry data. You have streaming data coming in. That was never existing in the traditional business intelligence world. So that's why there's this prominence about data lake. So essentially in this architecture, what we are doing is we are getting all the data, be it batch, real time, structured, unstructured data, and then you would load that data into Azure Data Factory. I did not include stream analytics or event hubs over here, but essentially, you can have them for the real-time analytics and store the data in the Azure Data Lake Store. Think of it as a landing zone. You would create multiple folders or hierarchies over there to store your real-time or geography-related folders. Like you are getting EMEA data on a daily basis, you can create your folder structure accordingly. Similarly, North America data, you can create it accordingly. And then what you would do from the Azure Data Lake Store, you would again use Azure Data Factory to load the data into your Azure SQL DB. So you might find it surprising, right? Why am I using DB for SQL data warehouse? Essentially, when you're actually moving to Azure, you don't have to go with Azure SQL data warehouse. Name might be misleading. You can still use Azure SQL database. If you're looking at a 4 terabyte, up to 4 terabytes of volume, you can pretty much use SQL database, or you can use managed instance if you're looking at 8 terabyte. Then look at SQL data warehouse, right? Because that's more useful if you're having huge volumes of data because it's expensive too. So for this customer, since the volumes are not very high, they're looking at 2 terabyte year-on-year growth, so we can begin with Azure SQL database. Then you have a component called Azure Databricks. This is not a Microsoft component. It's an third-party component by inventors of Spark. But it works very much like a first-party service within Azure. It has tight integration with Azure Data Lake Store and other components. The advantage of Azure Databricks is it's a common tool for both data scientists as well as data engineers. It's kind of a Jupyter notebook wherein you can write your Python, Spark code over there, and you can execute multiple engineering as well as data scientist workload. Like if you want to create an advanced analytics models, you can do that. Then from there, you can load the data into SQL database, and then again, you can create your semantic layer and Power BI out of the reporting. Right, on the bottom half, if you see, I have few other new components called Azure Data Catalog. So that's more of a data cataloging for storing your metadata and stuff within Azure. Then there's Azure Active Directory as well, wherein you can sync up with your Azure components. Any questions on the architecture? Or are we good? Okay. I mean, it depends, right? Good question. So it depends. So depending upon the model, you can either export it as an Excel or you can export it to a web endpoint, whichever way you want to do it, depending on the use case, basically. Yeah. So now let's get onto the key aspects of it. Let's look at different components. Even though you're new to Azure, this would definitely be useful because I'll be talking more about how each of these components can be secured within Azure, right? I mean, what are the considerations which you can take and what are the out-of-the-box features offered by Azure? Definitely, if you look at an real-time or an enterprise view, the adoption, you might use some on-premise security parameters also to operationalize it. So we'll answer these questions like from a network security standpoint, how do I secure my data, right? Then we'll look at how do you protect your data. Then we look at different authentication and monitoring and threat detection mechanisms for each one of these tools, right? So let's begin with Azure Data Factory. So again, with Azure Data Factory, as I already told, it's an ELT tool. It's an extract, load, transform tool. So with this, we will look at how do you secure your data in transit, REST, and also how do you store your credentials, keys and credentials, and also the firewall configuration. So these are the 4 aspects we'll look at it. So before even I proceed, so Azure Data Factory, there are 2 scenarios over here we are talking about. One is you're moving data within Azure, right? So my source is, I mean, think of Azure Data Factory for now as an orchestration tool which moves data from point A to point B, as simple as that. So there are 2 scenarios. One scenario is you're moving the data within cloud from say an Azure Data Lake store to an SQL data warehouse, right? In those scenarios, what you could do is Azure Data Factory as such does not store any data. It only stores credentials for your data sets, right? Like similar to your Informatica or SSIS, it would just store your data source credentials like your SQL database user ID and password, and Azure Data Lake keys, so on and so forth. But it wouldn't store any data as such. So how do you store those things, right? Data encryption in transit, it basically uses HTTPS or TLS for data encryption in transit. With respect to REST, so essentially, as I told here, if you are using, in this scenario, if you are using an Azure Data Lake store as your source and SQL DB as your destination, what it would do is, by default, Azure Data Lake Store provides SSCs, as an encryption mechanism. So it will just take advantage of that. Similarly, your SQL database takes use of TLS 1.2, so you can just use it. So Azure Data Factory will not do anything, but it's just you need to enable those capabilities in your sources and your destination, right? I'll show this demo also, a typical demo how you will configure that, right? Then there is one other key component called Azure Key Vault. So that's nothing but imagine it as a vaulting system which will centrally store all your keys, credentials, everything within the cloud, right? So it's not only on the cloud. In the next scenario, if I look, so in the second scenario, we are using Azure Data Factory, but in this case, what we are doing is we are copying data from your on-premise sources to the cloud, or it could be either way. You can move data from your cloud data sources to on-premise. So the way this works is there's an installable component called integration runtime. It was earlier called data management gateway. You essentially install this integration runtime within your on-premise VM, and then you can basically get the data using this to your cloud data sources, right? So this is the second scenario. So even in this scenario, Azure Key Vault can be used. Azure Key Vault is an Azure component wherein you can basically store the credentials and stuff, and then you can work on them, right? So let me show a quick demo on that. With me so far? Am I going fast, advanced, or is it like, are you with me? Thank you. Yeah. So this is, I'm just for the interest of time, this is, if I go to Azure portal, I can just type Azure Data Factory, and it opens up, you do author and monitor, and then it opens up an UI like this, right? So essentially, there are 4 components with Azure Data Factory which you should be aware of. One is pipeline. So pipeline is nothing but you're basically building that pipeline where you're defining your source and your destination and what you want to do with it. What activity you want to do. You want to copy data, you want to transform it. That is what pipeline is all about, right? Then there is something called as connections. So this is nothing but in your typical SSIS what we use to define the source and destination. This is exactly like that, wherein you define your connection. So this is where the security part of Azure Data Factory comes in, wherein you can basically store these connections. So here, my source is Azure Blob Storage, and my destination is an Azure SQL database. And then I have this Azure Key Vault. So this is the Azure Key Vault. It's an Azure component again. So here it provides me and capabilities to store keys, any keys if I want to store within Azure or any secrets. So in this case, what we are doing is, since this source is Azure Blob Storage, so if I open it up, it basically stores the key of that particular Azure Blob Storage. So in the next demo, I'll show the keys related part of the Azure Blob, but basically it is storing me the key. Similarly, from an SQL standpoint, what it is doing is it is storing the username and the connection string of that particular Azure. So if I do show secret value, it is essentially the connection string for that particular. So instead of defining those values, if I open my Azure Blob Storage, and I look at the connection string, I have two options. Either I can select connection string or I can select Azure Key Vault. If I select connection string, Azure Data Factory will store the credentials within itself, right? Even that is secured, but Microsoft rotates those. It is protected by Microsoft certificate and it is rotated every 2 years. Second option is to use Azure Key Vault, which we are doing now. The advantage of this is you basically have everything stored in one single repository. Say if you have 20 different applications using it, you just replace everything in one location and you're good with it. So that's one other advantage with it. So you basically give all your secret name, what is the version. If you leave it blank, it will just take the latest version. So this is important because if you think your key is compromised by someone else, or if your passwords are exposed, you can have a rotation policy set up. So whenever you change it, you don't have to give the version name. It will just take the latest version, whichever is available. Yeah.
Can you find some roles within that people, what people can see? So if you have one role that everyone can still...
You can. That has, I believe that has an IAM component to it. One second, let me confirm. Good question. If I go here, yeah. So if you look at it, has an IAM integration with it. So here you can basically define those roles, and you can say who is a reader, who is a contributor, who can do what. Yeah. You can basically define those things for the Key Vault specifically.
Yeah, you can also specifically focus on which key somebody.
Yeah. So that's about it, and then once that is done, so you can have firewall settings for Azure Key Vault and stuff like that, right? So so once that is about the Azure Data Factory. From an on-prem to cloud standpoint, I was talking about the port, right? So it communicates via port 443. You can just have that open to communicate between from a port standpoint. So that's about Azure Data Factory. Let's move on to the next component, which is your Azure Data Lake Store, right? So as I told, Azure Data Lake Store, it was called Azure Blob Storage. Then Microsoft released Azure Data Lake Store Gen 1. Now Microsoft has released Azure Data Lake Gen 2. So it's essentially very simple, right? It's a combination of Azure Blob and Azure Data Lake Store. Like it's basically a common, what do you call that? So Azure Data Lake Store, the use case for that is you'll use it more for an analytical or an business intelligence workload. Blob storage is just like your regular storage. But additional capability what Azure Data Lake Store provides you is it provides an hierarchical namespace where you can have folders defined and you can organize your data accordingly. So that's the advantage it provides. So how do you secure these things, right? I mean, so there are multiple aspects to it. One is how do you secure the folder hierarchy or your Azure Data Lake Store itself, that's one thing. And second thing is how do you store the data within those things. Third thing is how do you secure your firewalls and so on and so forth. And then storage and transport level encryption. So these are the few things which we'll look at. So let's look at the data protection standpoint or how the encryption happens. So by default, you can have a client-side encryption enabled, or you can use HTTP or SMB protocol, and it provides encryption at rest, SSE. So what this means basically is, once you store data within your Azure Data Lake Store, as soon as you put data over there, it's automatically encrypted. You don't have to do anything. It's just encrypted within there. And once you're trying to access data from your Azure Data Lake Store, it decrypts the message and gives you that data. So that's by default, it's available. If you want, you can enable. And also another advantage is you can either use server-side, SSE means server-side encryption, CSE means client-side encryption. So if you want, you can have your own encryption mechanism and use along with it. It provides multi-factor authentication, as in apart from the key, if you want people to use, send a message to your phone and you want to access, you can even do that. You can configure those aspects as well, right? Now coming to authentication, you have RBAC or you can have key and shared access key. I'll showcase all this in the demo, so I'm just setting some context around this. So essentially you can basically, if you want to give, say you're working with a third-party vendor and you want them to have access to your Azure Data Lake Store for a limited amount of time, you can basically create a key with a shared access key wherein you can basically define, I want this key to be enabled till next Wednesday or whichever, or for this month end, right? And you can share it. As soon as that's over, you can just revoke, that's revoked and he won't be able to access. So that's a use case why you would want to do. Then there are other aspects which come into play, key rotation and all. I'll talk about that in the demo. One other aspect, network security. Say if you want to protect, it's very important, right? I mean, how do you, from a network standpoint, how do I protect it? One beautiful thing is you can basically, at a very granular level, you can stop at an IP level. Like if you want to restrict at an IP level that only this particular IP, if only my laptop can access the Azure Data Lake Store, I can do that. I can define that in the portal itself. Or if you want your on-premise network to access the Azure Data Lake Store, you can even add that only this particular virtual network or this particular subnets within my virtual network can access Azure Data Lake Store. All that granular configurations can be done very easily. Then threat protection, these are advanced capabilities wherein Azure will scan and it will give you any anomalies. If anyone is accessing at a different frequency, you will get to know all that. This is a preview feature. There's something called as private endpoint, which Microsoft, this is I think still in the preview. So this is essentially what it does is it will provide you a private endpoint wherein you can use a private IP within your VNet to connect to your Azure Data Lake Store or any of these components. All the components which I'm showing here, they have this private endpoint enabled. So essentially when you're talking to your on-premise network, it's like talking to a private IP within your thing, right? So one other thing I was talking about, network isolation, wherein you can restrict particular VNet or subnet within your within your overall landscape, or within on-premise also. I want certain IPs to access my Azure Data Lake Store. If you look at the green tick mark over here, only these can access, and other networks are disabled. I'll show all this in the demo. Yeah. Yeah. As I told, it's by default TLS 1.2. Like it's encrypted by default. That will be taken care by. What is the use of what? It's more secure, right? So the biggest disadvantage with public IP, what happens is, like, say there is something called as allow all Azure services to connect to your, there is one button on and off. Essentially, previously what used to happen, you had to tick that on if any of your Azure services had to talk to that Azure Data Lake Store. So there is this vulnerability that, some person who is not even in your subscription, they can hack into your thing. But with this, they cannot do that because it's all restricted for that private IP. Right? Yeah. So it's more secured. You're eradicating that vulnerability. Very good question. What's that? No, not performance as such, but from a security standpoint. But definitely very good. That's the thing about private. A lot of people get confused. What is this private link all about? But yeah, think about that. When you go to Azure Port, you see that on off button. I'll show that, right? So you don't have to click on and still connect. Yeah. So let's look at the demo for Azure Data Lake Gen 2 now. So this is my Azure portal. It's very easy. You just go home, type Azure Data Lake Store, and then you will get this access, and you can go to portal.azure.com. Go to storage account, and then you can give all your capabilities over here, like what is my storage account, which location I want it, standard, premium. So this is what I was talking about, right? It has been, you can either create a blob storage, Azure Data Lake Storage 1, V2 is a combination of both of them. So that's another thing which you can do. I already created one, so let's use that one. Even when you're creating, you can define the network parameters or configurations, or you can define it after you have defined also. So this is the IAM part I'm talking about. Again, same thing which we looked at a Key Vault. You can come here and you can basically add some role assignments. You can have a reader, you can select an user within your subscription or external user, or a principal or another Azure resource, right? You can give them access to your, within the IAM. You can look at the role assignments over here. Apart from that, let's go to this key aspect which we are talking about. which is your firewalls and virtual networks, right? So this is the part I was talking about. So here what you can do essentially is you can give access to everyone, right? I don't care. Anyone can access my blob storage, right? If you're doing a POC and you don't care, and you can do all that. But if you want it more secured, you can select the selected networks. You can come here and you can basically either add an existing network or you can create a new virtual network. So virtual network is nothing but a VPC within, or it's like a boundary, right? It could be your on-prem, or you create a VNet. Under that, you create multiple subnets, and under that, you create multiple Azure resources which you want to. So essentially what you're doing is you're protecting your data lake to access only those particular VNet resources within that VNet can talk to. You have a VM within an VNet, only that VM can talk to this Azure Data Lake Store. Or you have a VM within your VNet, only that particular thing can talk. Otherwise, nobody else can talk to it. From a firewall standpoint, you can basically add any particular IP address who wants to, to whom you want to give access, so on and so forth. So this is your private endpoint connection again. You can add your private endpoint and configure those aspects over here. So this is the advanced security part, wherein you can basically have that, and any Azure automatically scans and it will give you the results, if there are any vulnerabilities, right? So this is the keys part of it. So this is very important. Again, any application, client applications which you are using, you can basically use these keys for providing them access. Again, one other key point to note here, if you note there are two keys, you might ask, why do I have two keys over here? The reason you have two keys is, say you have a client application and it is trying to access your Azure Data Lake Store, right? And you think it's compromised or something, right? So what you could do is you can replace all your application with key 2. Meanwhile, you can basically regenerate the key 1 and you can, rotate. Essentially, it's for rotation of your keys, right? So that's why you see key 1 and key 2 over here, right? So yeah, then this is another aspect. I was talking about that scenario about a third-party vendor to whom you want to give temporary access to your Azure Data Lake Store. So what you can do is you can select the component. You can give, either you want to give them a read, write, create, update, which permission you want to go, you can define, and you can even define what is the start time and the end time for that connection to happen. And also you can define the protocols. Is it an HTTPS you want to enable, and you can just generate the connection string and it will generate that parameterized connection string for you, and you can use it in your client applications. Questions with me? Okay. Yeah. Oh, thank you. So only you are with me. Yeah. So now let's look at the main component, right? Azure SQL database, or I actually categorize both of them together over here. What do you call Azure SQL database and data warehouse together? Reason being, again, data warehouse name is misleading. You can, whenever you say, yeah.
Yeah, one question about that, because of this week's announcement of Synapse, and that's
I know. I know. I know that's news to me also, by the way. But that's more of what that does is that's more of kind of think of it as an all the components which I'm talking about, data lake store or your SQL DB, instead of giving or assigning security for each and every resource, that provides a capability where you can give security at a higher level, and then you can roll it down to very easily. It's more from a manageability standpoint, but still these components would exist as is. You can define your security over here, or you can use it, but it's not mandatory that you will have to use that synopsis or that particular thing to define your security. Either you can do it at an individual level or you can do it at that level. I looked at it at the Microsoft booth yesterday. Yeah. So yeah. So again, some aspects over here is repetitive with respect to Azure Data Lake Store, so I will not repeat them again. If I were to say, there it was SSC server-side encryption, for your data at rest. Here we are using TDE, transport data encryption. The good part is if you have encrypted your database on-prem, right, SQL Server, you can use the same key, import it into Key Vault, and you can use that for your Azure when you're doing the migration. It has all these capabilities. Either it could be a server managed or a client managed key. And then if you pay attention, like there are three aspects which I want to talk about here. One is something called as data masking. Second is TDE. Third is always encrypted. So what all these are there, but what are all these, right? So always encrypted is nothing but if I talk about TDE, what it does, it basically encrypts your data within the particular storage. All your backups of your Azure SQL database are encrypted. But what happens is when you actually query, your data is in plain text, right? So that's not it. But with always encrypted, what happens is your data is encrypted even when you're querying. So it's completely encrypted, like end-to-end cycle. Even when you're querying the data, it's encrypted. But there is an option within SSMS wherein you can, if you put always encrypted equal to enabled, you can view the plain text. So that's the fundamental difference. Then the third aspect, which I was talking about, data masking. So that is nothing but I am an administrator user. Then I have a DBA or a DevOps person, right? There is sensitive salary data or something which I don't want them to look at it. So what I could do is I could create a DevOps role within my Azure Active Directory or wherever, and I can enable this data masking, wherein it will not show those particular columns to those particular user groups. So that's the fundamental difference between all these three, right? TDE, always encrypted, and then data masking, right? Again, we are, I think all of you are aware of row level security. The way you can do it, you would define a function, table valued function, then you can use a security policy and enable row level security within Azure SQL Database, provide some capabilities around it. Then MFA, if you are giving access to your third party. So when it comes to Azure world, we are not just looking at the enterprise users, right? We are even looking at third party. People can have @gmail.com, @outlook.com, so on and so forth. So how do you secure? So you can have a two-way, like multi-factor authentication, wherein it sends a code to you and you can use it. VNET network security, firewall, it's pretty much the same. But again, SQL firewall thing is extremely important, wherein you can define your database firewall or you can define it at server level firewall. I'll dig deep into it in the next slide. Third is, this is an additional package which you have to purchase. Like within Azure, you just need to enable it. Advanced data security, wherein you can do threat detection, auditing, and vulnerability assessment, like any misconfigurations which you have done, SQL ingestion. Microsoft will continuously scan your thing. You can even manually start that scan, and it will give you the report. If any anomalies and stuff, it will give you the report. So this is the network security, IP-based firewall I was talking about. Very easy, though the diagram might look a little bit scary. So you might either use, you're hitting, say you're querying you're trying from an SQL Server Management Studio, I'm hitting my Azure SQL database, right? So either I can query from an Azure or I could query from the internet. So what it would do is, internally it will first check the database firewall rule, if my IP or it is enabled or if I can access. If yes, then it will directly go and access the database. If not, it will go ahead and check at the server level firewall rule, and then once it checks the firewall rule, if I have access, then it will go ahead and access the database. If I don't, then the connection is rejected straight off, right? So with respect to data warehouse, one limitation does not support DB level firewalls at this point, but maybe down the line it might. But because of the way the architecture is, I think it does not support at this point. Then again, database IP rules can be done using TESQL. So these are some limitations at this point which we are aware of, right? So again, VNET service endpoints, this is pretty much like the way we looked at Azure Data Lake Store, wherein you can basically limit the VNET or the subnet which can access your Azure SQL database, right? So this is again a very good, you have a VM, you want only certain VMs within a particular subnet to access your Azure SQL database, you can very well define those capabilities over there. And then again, it provides role-based access control and stuff. Private link, same feature which we looked at Azure Data Lake Store, that even SQL database and EW are in. I mean, I think this is in pretty much in preview, but yes, this is another very good, much awaited feature by a lot of customers I worked with, right? Let's look at a quick demo now. Whatever I spoke, I'll just show the demo. All good? Friday.
So
Yeah.
we know there are so many products out there, so many things out there. How do we know that it is secure? For example,
Yeah, I'll show that. So they have something called as vulnerability assessment. So what it does is you can configure it. You can basically enable the auditing, and you based upon whatever settings you're interested in or anything is wrong. By default, it has it. If you are interested in something, you can receive those alerts to your email. If you want daily, monthly, you can configure all that. I'll show that in the demo. But yes, it will show you, it proactively will tell you that, this is something wrong with this, but there is an additional login which been added, check it if it's malicious and stuff like that. Yeah.
Okay, is something by mistake myself is when I was administrating them and giving the permission, now I'm not restricted it.
Uh-huh.
Is any way there can give the kind of picture where okay, from here to here the green is there, from here to here resources are there, or something like that. What picture of it? How kind of auditing that would also give us a picture
Uh-huh.
what has what access, what type of access.
So there is something called a security center over here that has everything, like whatever vulnerability and all. That's a central thing which you have where you can track all the thing. But yeah, from an yeah, that's the responsibility. I mean, that's what they in the cloud they talk about shared responsibility model, wherein capabilities are out there, but it's up to the customer or the user to use it in the right way. But again, there are some proactive suggestions which are provided over here which you can adhere to and stuff. But for example, yesterday I just added a SQL login, right? Then as soon as I added, within 5 minutes, I see there's an email from Microsoft saying that, there is a vulnerability, you have just added this principal, looks malicious and stuff. So you can configure, but it's up to us. I mean, definitely the onus is, because someone is giving the access, then he's authorized to give the access, and he is giving it. So it might be right. That's the assumption.
Yes, then my concern is if there's new login that creates no
Yeah.
what if they have one employee left, another employee comes in,
Mhm. Yeah.
you get a quick look on it, you open one and you do it.
Yeah. That's good. Actually, that's why you have these keys and all that, right? I was talking about Azure Data Lake Store. You have these keys, and even if you look at Azure Active Directory, I'll show you the demo. You can, it's more of like you can set the rule or whatever, like for so and so period only you will have someone has left, then you can basically rotate it and generate a new key, so that that person who has left the company no longer has access. In fact, see here, the beauty is it's not just the enterprise users. If you look at the demo right now, which I'm showing, it will even cover the outside, because here we're talking about born in the cloud application, like SaaS applications, wherein users may not be your enterprise users. They would be outside users as well, right? Yeah, that's where you have all this multi-factor authentication and all these things also. Yeah. So let's look at, so this is again another involved demo. I'll see how much ever I can cover over here. So let's look at IAM. So again, each and every Azure resource, whatever you talk, that has its own IAM. So essentially here, what you could do is you can, the first demo where I showed that I created an Azure Data Factory pipeline, but you need to give that Azure Data Factory access to this SQL Azure. The way we can do that is you can basically come here and you can add. So you can give them any of the owner, contributor, or anything. So either it could be an user, it could be a group, or it could be an service principal. So in this case, it could be an Azure Data Factory resource, right? ADF demo v3. So it could be this particular Azure Data Factory resource. So essentially what I'm doing over here is using my Azure Active Directory, I'm giving access to this Azure Data Factory to my SQL Azure database. So you can give it to not only just users and groups, but also the resources, right? So having said that, let's move on quickly to the other part of the story. Pretty much the traditional SQL login, whatever you give, SA, I mean, all those things remain the same, but I'll show you more from an Active Directory or a third-party user how that authentication works, and how multi-factor authentication, how do you configure a multi-factor authentication, right? So if the way you would do is, so here I'm going to this Azure Data Factory, Azure Active Directory over here. Yeah, so this is the Azure Active Directory I have logged into. So what I've done is I've created a bunch of users over here just for the sake of demo, right? And then for these users, I've organized into three particular groups, three sets of groups. One is I'm calling as MFA users, like multi-factor authentication users. These users are someone whom I want to log in twice, right? That's the MFA users. Then I have DevOps users. So these users are the users which I'm talking about, like these are DVS and I don't want them to, view the salary data or some key important information. SQL admin. So the way you start, the beginning point for Azure Active Directory configuration is you need to have one SQL admin configured as a principal within your Azure SQL database, server. So the way we do that is, this is the starting point. If you can listen this carefully, like I have this SQL admins. So what I would do is, I have this, Azure Active Directory admin. So what I've done is I've set this SQL admins as my administrator within my Azure Active. Within the SQL server, I went to this Azure Active Directory admin. I've set this, and I have set this SQL admin as a principal. Once you set this, how do you add the remaining users is something which you cannot do it in the portal or using the UI. You will have to go to SSMS and you will have to use a command like this, wherein what it will do is, instead of creating these users in the master database, it will create these users. You will have to create them as a contained database users. What that means is, like here DB1 is my custom database, it's not a master database. So what it will do is it will add all these users. So here I have, apart from that SQL admins, which is my admin user, I'm adding some other users, right? So these are not non-admin, so I'll have to come and add them like this. Like I say create user, I give the whatever, either I can give the group name or I can give the individual username, and I say from external provider, and it gets added. So these are the steps where you can add, these are the steps you need to follow to add additional users for your Active Directory or a third party. So if you look at it, none of these are enterprise users. These are all external users. It could be gmail.com, outlook.com, and so on and so forth. Now let's look at how do you configure multi-factor authentication. So for that, what you would do is, where is it? Yeah. So over here. So again, I'm here. So I have created, this is just the name I've created, but there's a group called MFA users. In that there is one login. That is nothing but your MFA demo SQL @outlook.com. So that is the user I have created. So the way you essentially do that is, you come to your, let me go to Azure Active Directory again. Yeah. And over here, over here I would go to the security tab, and within the security tab there is something called as conditional access, right? So in the conditional access, what I could do is I could create a new policy, right? So I already created a pre-policy. I am calling that as MFA access, and within that MFA access, what I'm doing is I am selecting all the users and groups. I'm telling it, select the users and groups, like all users, or I can say all groups. So I am telling whom to include. So here I'm including the MFA user. I'm including which app, like this configuration I can just do for SQL database. Like your question, I can enable it for all SQL database, data lake and all, like for that particular @Outlook or Gmail or any external user, I can do it for other resources as well, right? And then from a grants perspective, so this is where I would say, right, grant access but require multi-factor authentication. So I'm just doing a small checkbox saying that that particular user would require multi-factor authentication, right? So this is how you basically configure your multi-factor authentication over there. And then when you essentially try to come here, and if I want to, like, there are multiple options you can select over here. You will select universal with MFA. You do connect. Sometimes because of network it is slow, but let's give it a try. I think it disconnected, connect. database engine. I think I already connected it earlier, but let me, if I can like disconnect. How was that? No, I think I'll have to close everything. Maybe towards the end, if you find time, I'll just revisit that. But essentially what happens is once you log in, it will ask me for the username and password. Once I enter that, it will send me a code to my mobile since I've associated my mobile to this account. And then once I type the code, then it will let me into the database. Right? Let's cover other things, then we can close everything, and then we'll look at that MFA demo, right? So yeah, that's about the MFA part of it. Now let's cover the DevOps users use case, right? So I was talking about this use case wherein I want certain information not to be viewed by certain certain group or certain users. So there is in the security pane, all this I'm covering in the security pane, by the way. So here there's something called as dynamic data masking. By default, as soon as you enable it, my SQL Server scans all your database fields, and it will tell, for these particular fields you can have this dynamic data mask, like add mask. You can say add mask, and it will basically add that particular thing to, it will mask that, and it will give you the default value, whatever it wants. Or you can tell it, if you want a specific column to be masked, you can even do that by doing add mask, and you can configure, what is the default value you want to use, and what is the schema, what is the table, and what is the default value you want to use. If you look at note over here, SQL users excluded from masking. Administrators are always excluded. So we had that SQL admins group, so that for those people it will be like they can see all the data. But for other groups like the DevOps or MFA users and other groups, you can have this masking enabled. So just for the sake of it, so here I have it an RC admin, and here it's a DevOps equal. So I'm just querying this particular thing, right? So here if you notice is once I query, I have data over here visible, like whatever is the national ID number and the birthday. But if I look at the second tab, here once I query it, it's all hashed out for the national ID number, and here for the birthday it's showing me the default value, right? So that's the good part about it. So I'm just querying it. The same data set but different views. So that's the thing. Yeah. What's that? Yeah, I mean, I think it's like it does it on the fly, I think, when you're querying. Yeah, you can do that. I mean, yeah. Yeah. So here it's not about the where clause. That's row level security you're talking about, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, those are some, you can just hack it out and do all that, but yeah. But again, as you said, you don't have any thing, but yes, you can definitely, because it's just doing it when you're querying it. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. But still, if data is not completely unknown data set, then it will be difficult. It's like one level of security. For that, you will do something called as always encrypted. So what that does is, as I already told, right, it's completely encrypted. You can create a key, and you can have a client, you give the key to the client application, like you have a front-end application, it's accessing the database only the client application. But from an SSMS, if I want to query it, it won't allow me to do it, right? So that's, so here, if you look at always encrypted, so there is a setting which you can set over here, using which, if you want to do plain text querying, you can do with it, but you will have to configure that over here when you're querying it, right? So that's about the dynamic data masking, transport data encryption. So again, as I told, this has got nothing to do with the encryption. I mean, encryption, but not about that hash. Columns are not hashed or anything. It will encrypt your database, it will encrypt your logs, it will encrypt your backups, right? That's what it basically encrypts. You can have it on or off. And this is at the database level, but one other thing, if I open TD at the server level, what you could do is, yes, so here it gives you an option to bring your own key to. Like for example, if I have encrypted my database on the client, if I want to use that key, I can bring that key to my Azure Key Vault and I can basically use that key. Right, I can configure it in the Key Vault and I can use that particular key for my, what do you call that, for my TD encryption, right? So that's one thing which you can do. Now let's go to the other important topic. I mean, so good here. Any questions so far? Right. So now let's look at the second part of the story, like the question which you asked earlier, right? How do you like advanced data security? So there are some capabilities proactively provided by Microsoft or Azure, using which you can basically enable those aspects to do this. Yeah, that's okay. So here if I go to this particular, what do you call that? Yeah, advanced data security. So there are three aspects to it for advanced data security. One is data discovery and classification. Third is vulnerability assessment. And then the another thing is advanced threat protection. I'll go one by one. So the way you enable this is not enabled by default, right? In fact, I already ran the scan for the demo, so that's why you're looking at this vulnerability report where it is showing you all the high level risk, medium level risk. The good part is it won't just show you, what is the risk or what is wrong. It will show you the remediation steps also, what you need to do to fix. In fact, it goes to a level where it gives you a script to actually execute that over here, right? So that's the beauty of it. So the way you enable it is you come to auditing and you first need to enable the auditing. Again, this is not enabled by default in SQL database. If you need additional security, then there is an additional fee. Right now I'm using the trial version for 30 days, but which will expire 2 days from now. But you can basically purchase it for some additional price and enable it. But it's definitely, if you're looking at a production environment, you definitely should. Few advantage of this is like data discovery and classification with all this GDPR and all these regulations. What it will do is it will automatically scan the data and it will personally identify information, PII data, and it will classify. Is it confidential? Is it confidential GDPR and all those things? You can even define your own labels. So it's not just of the categorization, it will label it, and what it will do is next time when an user queries, once the label is done and it is persisted, what it will basically do is next time when someone queries it or so on and so forth, it will create a report like this user from this location queried this data and this much volume of data and all those things. So you're basically you're able to audit it and you can give that to your auditors and so on and so forth. So that's an out of the box capability with all this localization and all your GDPR and all those regulations which are going on around. And then if you look at the second part is vulnerability assessment. So again, this is a very good feature. So this is where you're talking about this thing, right? You can identify any misconfigurations to your point. So if you look at it, it will tell you, these are all the it will tell you by looking at the security check, you can tell, sensitive data column should be classified, TDE should be enabled, it is giving you all those risks over here, and server level file should be tracked and minimum at restricted. So all these things. But having said that, say, yeah, if you it will see, if you look at, if I click on that one, it will give you the description, what exactly is the issue with that particular data column, it will give you what are all the results. So as I told, confidential GDPR and stuff. But and it will also give you the script, what is the remediation script. One other thing is, say if this is just a POC environment and you just don't care, or it's a dev instance for that matter, right? And you're using some scrub data and you don't care, and it's as per your standard. So what you could do is, you can do an approve baseline. So what happens when you do approve baseline is, it'll remove that particular vulnerability in your scan. So next time it will not detect this as an error because you're okay with that vulnerability. Right? So you can basically, do all those things also over here, right? Yeah. So so that's about this vulnerability assessment. Now let's go to if you want, one other thing is you can manually scan. This is done, you can on a schedule basis, but you can even export it out and you can give it to your auditors. You can have the scan history, how many times happened and so on and so forth, right? Those things also you can do. One other thing is advanced threat detection. Again, it detects errors like your SQL injection or any access control related errors, right? So this is the one which I was talking about. I just added a principal to my Azure Active Directory, so it just gave me this error. It even sent me an email, right? You can even configure it to be sent to your emails as well, right? So that's about the security part of it. To be honest, if I go, SQL database itself will have its own session of 75 minutes to if I go deep, but that's with the other components which we have. I would like to stop. Any questions with me? Friday evening. Yeah. So I think, I showed the demo first and now I'm showing. So this was the Azure Active Directory authentication. So it simplifies your identity management, external users. You can even have flexible configuration so that you can manage everything centrally, right? And you can even eliminate strong passwords, right? That's a very good thing, right? You don't need to have any passwords and stuff, right? So this is about TD and this is about vulnerability assessment, which you looked at, and then the threat detection, right? So any SQL ingestion, remediation steps, you can customize those capabilities. So to your question, I think the best answer would be to customize the policy, as simple as that. You can, customize, create your own policy, and whichever way you want to have it, you can set those things up, right? So that was about thing. So let's look at Azure Event Hub. So Azure Event Hub, again, you will use this if you're doing a streaming scenario, not for a batch scenario. But this again, it's pretty much it works the same way you created keys for Azure Data Lake Store, right? Similarly, you would create keys for your Azure Event Hubs, and you would basically store, or only clients which have access to those keys can send data to Azure Event Hub. So Event Hub is nothing but, imagine like it as a buffer. Your streaming telemetry data is sending, like Stream Analytics or Kafka or anything one of these, they're sending data to, but your source is not capable enough to handle. So Event Hub is kind of a middleman. It's a buffer. It will store the data. So it will basically, only clients which have access to that key can send data. You can even, any malicious user who is sending data, you can even stop them. So it again works in the same principle. We have seen shared access signature, wherein you can define the time limit, like, from I want access from this time to this time. You can even configure all those things, right? Azure Analysis Services, again, pretty much it works. The good part about this is it's very much integrated with Azure Active Directory. So that's pretty much it. It's pretty much very tightly integrated with Azure Active Directory. So everything is managed the way we have done in the on-prem world with Azure Analysis Services. It is managed in a similar fashion. So again, this is one of the interesting products. Though it's not an, again, I will reiterate, though it's not an Azure product. Yeah.
Does Azure Analysis Service also have like always encrypted or something?
Very good question. I don't think so. I'm not sure actually, to be honest. I don't know. Azure Analysis, no, I'm not sure. Let's check it out. I don't think so, but
I haven't heard about it in Terraform
Okay.
Aside from the role of home security.
Yeah, rows. I think yeah, those things are definitely supported. That I mean, what do you call? Using the way you do define the groups, and then you that is definitely supported. But I'm not sure on the encryption part. Yeah, I'll get back. Right. Yeah.
So, just trying to understand the vault, vault.
Key vault.
Yeah, so I think so. If you have a .NET application,
Hmm.
if it wants to connect to a SQL server,
Hmm.
do I need to give the shared key of the SQL server, or should I give the assign the vault key name?
Yeah, so vault key name. So basically, you will store the Azure SQL database connection string within your vault, and whatever the name of that secret which you are creating, like let me show, right? So whatever key which you are creating, that you would give to your .NET application. So, as in. It centrally stores. I mean, it's basically centrally stores all your keys, credentials, certificates. Like how many things you have seen, right? It's not just SQL database connection strings. You have seen keys, you have seen certificates. You can create your own keys and certificate within it.
I'm going to give you a practical talk.
Mm-hmm.
So one of my employee was there.
Mm-hmm.
He knows the key,
Mm-hmm.
just like username password.
Mm-hmm.
He leaves.
Mm-hmm.
Now if I have to change,
Hmm.
how many implications I need to change?
So that is the advantage of key vault, right? So you just use that key, what do you call that label of that particular key, and you can change your connection string over here. Once you changed it, then all your client applications can access that key, right?
Connect to the, okay, so what you have is the key for the,
Database.
no, key for database or key for the vault, key vault.
So okay, let me open that, right? So here, what you do is it basically you're defining you have a connection string, right?
The connection string, there's a shared key, right?
Yeah, it's a shared key. So no, it's not a shared key. So take an Azure SQL database. Simple example, Azure SQL database, it has a connection string, right? That connection string I'm storing in Key Vault. Now this Azure SQL database is being accessed by 10 different .NET applications or 10 different clients. So for me, I will not go ahead and change this connection string at 10 different places. I'll just update it in the Key Vault if I have to update something, and then that's it. I mean, everything's
Know that this particular key vault record.
because you gave the key name, right? You gave the name.
Key name here.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So think of it as a central repository, but from a value add standpoint, you can generate your own certificate, keys, and all that also. Yeah. And then let's go to this Azure Databricks. How many of you are heard about Azure Databricks before? Oh, okay, nice, good. So this I think you would have already heard about Spark, right? So this is by inventors of Spark only. So what they have done is there is this general problem, right? Data scientists deal with huge amounts of data, right? And they are not skilled with data engineering. Now, if you talk about data engineers, they have their different tool sets to work on. So the beauty about Databricks is it bridges both these worlds, right? It basically helps both the data engineers and the data scientists to basically, it's a notebook kind of an interface, and then you can use it to create it. So as I already told, though this is a third-party product, it's basically like a first-party product within Microsoft landscape. Wherein what you could do is, this is Azure Data Factory I'm showcasing to you. So here what you can do is, you have an Azure Databricks notebook, and within that notebook, you can come here, and once you create a Databricks workspace within Azure, what you can do is, this is a separate portal. This is a Databricks portal which you logged on to. So once I go to my, let's say if I go to my, let me show you. You just come here and you create the Azure Databricks over here, but I've already created one Azure Databricks for the demo. If I go here, so when I create this Databricks workspace, there is no charge involved. So I can click on this particular workspace, and once I do the launch workspace, what it will do is it will do a single sign-on connection to my Databricks workspace, right? So that's one secure, way of seamlessly connecting to it. And then what you could do is you can actually generate a token. So if you want to generate a token, you can very well do it from the portal over here. Like you can manage account and you can do all those things. Again, this is tightly integrated with your Azure Active Directory, so that's another advantage which you get, right? Yeah, so here you can come and you can basically generate a token. It is available for 90 days. Once you generate, you can copy the token, done. And say if from Azure Data Factory, I get data from Azure Data Lake Store and I want Databricks notebook to process it and store it somewhere. So I'll not go deep into Databricks, but basically this is the interface which you have. And over here, what you can do is within this particular workspace, you can create notebooks to take the data lake data and process it and send it to your destination things. You can create jobs and all that, but you can even have your Azure Data Factory. So within Azure Data Factory, these are different, like you have in SSIS, you have different activities which you can create. So within this, basically I can when I define my connection string, like the way we saw for data lake store and SQL database, what you could do is you can come here and you can give that particular token, whatever we have selected over there. You can again, you can give the access token. So seamlessly, it will just, whoever has this token, only they can access.
Is there any like sort of cross-region considerations? So if I have a Databricks in, say, Northern Europe, and I want to read a data lake Gen 2 in Central Europe?
Yeah, I mean, good question. I mean, typically the recommendation is to select it in the region which you have. Obviously, yeah, because it's in that region, there's a latency, delay, and stuff like that. So it's recommended you have co-located as much as possible. There will be a latency delay, as simple as that. But yes, it definitely would work. Yeah, there's no restriction as. But again, I mean, it would work, but then there is this compliance, like that country data needs to stay there. Then those are different things to talk about, right? Yeah. So yeah, that's about it. You can either generate and so it has Python 2, 3. So you can give the token. Again, this has the same thing. You can use your Azure Key Vault to do all these things. Yeah. So yeah, so that's pretty much it. I don't want to go deep into Databricks, but yeah, it has SSO. It has all these your access, or similar to the way we saw in other capabilities. It has RBAC enabled with your Azure Active Directory, and also it has VNET restrictions also, which you can set up, right? So yeah, that's about it. This is where you can go and submit session evaluations if you like the session. And then thank you all for making it. Hope you learned something new. Thanks. Thank you.